The eastern cliff of Tessavar Island stood 40 meters above the cloud layer, a shelf of limestone jutting into the windward dark, and Jalle crouched alone at its very lip while pre-dawn violet bled into the eastern sky. Below him, the clouds moved like a second ocean, unbroken and slow. A hand-drawn map lay weighted open between two stones, and his ink-stained fingers pressed flat against the paper. The wind at this height had a voice, not threatening, only continuous. A pressure that entered through the ears and lived behind the eyes. He had been here since the second watch bell. His coat was damp and he had not noticed. The map was operational. That was all it was, he told himself, with the careful flatness of a man reasoning around something he refused to look at directly. Ossian knew the survey routes, the ones the Crestward Commission still used, the ones they had abandoned, the ones they believed no one else knew existed. He was a tool that happened to have a laugh. That was not Jalle's problem. That did not change what this was. He smoothed the edge of the map with his thumb, then did it again. The gesture was not about the map. I drew this with my body, came the thought, arriving before he could stop it. He folded the map and slid it into his inside pocket, close to his sternum, and stood. The horizon line crossed his eyes as he rose, and he looked toward the light, and the light told him nothing useful at all. Above the island's unused cartography office, in a cramped survey loft, morning came sideways through one shuttered window, striping across a work table buried in rolled vellum and tide charts. Ossian sat on a three-legged stool eating cold rice from a tin, a closed notebook before him, a single oil lamp still burning from the night before. The oil had pooled at the bottom of its reservoir, throwing an unsteady light. He had not replaced it. He was watching it decide whether to last. Footsteps came up the narrow stair. One knock, and the door opened without waiting for an answer, because they both already knew who it was. The eastern survey route passes within 200 meters of the Commission's seasonal waystation, Jalle said, level and businesslike, like a man who had decided how this conversation would go before he arrived. I need to know if they've staffed it since autumn. Good morning, Ossian replied, unhurried. A man who had not yet agreed to be managed this early. There was a beat. Good morning, Jalle conceded, absorbing the correction without acknowledging it. The waystation. Unstaffed, Ossian said mildly, reaching for the tin again. They rotate in at the spring melt, which gives you... He stopped, set the tin down, looked at Jalle with the attention of someone reading past the surface of a conversation. You walked here at dawn to ask me something you could have waited 2 hours to ask over breakfast. What is the actual question? The lamp flickered. Both of them noticed. Jalle's hands hung open at his sides, not fists, only too still, the kind of stillness that costs something. If we proceed and we are seen, Jalle said, the businesslike surface cracking by a millimeter, if the Commission gets a confirmed sighting of your face on that route, they won't file a report. You understand that. They won't file a report. I understand that, Ossian answered, steady as a man who had reached this destination hours ago. I need you to have understood that before you agreed, Jalle said, quieter, the words costing more than they should. Not after. The lamp made its decision and stayed lit. Jalle. Something almost warm moved in Ossian's voice, the tone of a man recognizing a wound he had never been shown. I agreed knowing that. I agreed knowing you knew that. I think what you're actually here to ask is whether I'd like you to talk me out of it, and the answer is no, I would not. Jalle looked at him a long moment, then looked at the lamp. The oil's low, he said very quietly, a statement with the weight of an admission. Without being asked, he crossed to the shelf, found a reserve flask, and refilled the lamp. Careful work, steady hands, not a drop spilled. The light steadied and brightened. He did not turn around. Thank you, Ossian murmured, not making it larger than it was. Jalle capped the flask and set it back, still facing away. Spring melt is 12 days out, he said, barely above a murmur, the words arriving as if he had tested them and found them safe, which was itself the problem. I'll need the route marked before the 8th. Then he left, and the door closed, and the lamp burned steady and full. In the head woman's house, the kitchen was low-ceilinged and warm, already fragrant with miso and wood smoke. Nuri stood at the cutting board, reducing scallions with the ease of 40 years. Tomo sat on the high stool by the hearth, feet not reaching the floor, prodding a piece of cold mochi with one finger. The lane outside carried children's voices, a fishmonger's cart, a cat disputing territory beneath the eaves. The weight of Tomo's silence was not ordinary. Nuri-san, he said at last, too casual. the forced lightness of someone who had been awake long enough to rehearse it. If someone didn't want you to know who they really were, but they kept doing things that were basically a map, is that on purpose? Her knife did not slow. That depends on whether they know they're doing it. What if they think they're being careful? Then every careful act is a different kind of map, she said, fond and somewhat devastating, still watching her scallions. More detailed, because they're trying so hard. Tomo stared at the mochi, which had gone entirely flat and cold. Does that mean you can't trust the careful parts? Nuri set the knife down and turned, studying him with that particular patient attention of hers. It means the careful parts are where the trust lives, she said gently. Anyone can give you the easy version of themselves. The careful parts? The parts they're guarding? Those are the ones they're protecting because they matter. You follow? His jaw worked. He looked up. So the map is the real thing, even if he doesn't mean to be making it. She picked up her knife again, and a small smile came and went. She would neither confirm nor deny. Eat your mochi, she said warmly, before it becomes a floor tile. He picked it up, but did not eat it yet, only held it, as something settled in him that was neither comfortable nor unwelcome. The first day of learning to carry weight. Along the covered market row, among hung lengths of indigo and saffron and the smell of saltfish and cut citrus, Sarah moved with a ledger tucked under one arm. She paused at a stall where a bolt of blue cloth had arrived that was not on the inventory. Her mind had catalogued the anomaly before she was consciously aware of it. This was what she did, catching the things that were slightly wrong before they became wrong enough for anyone else to notice. It had kept the village alive through 3 bad harvests and a flood. She had never told anyone how exhausted it made her. Hamiko, the dye seller, a weathered woman of 60 with blue-stained fingers, leaned across her table. "New supplier from the Crestward side," she said, cheerful with the pleasure of freely given gossip. "Came in on the surveyor's old skiff. You know, the disgraced one, Verath. Apparently he arranged the contact. You didn't know?" Sarah's pen stopped barely. "I'll need to document the supplier contact for the season ledger," she said pleasantly, nothing showing. "Did he file a transit notice?" "I assumed it was handled," Hamiko said, suddenly uncertain. "He seemed to know what he was doing." "I'm sure he did," Sarah replied warmly, closing down the angle she had opened by reflex. "The blue is beautiful. How many bolts came in?" Hamiko told her, and Sarah wrote it down in precise, unbroken handwriting. Then she walked into a narrow side lane and stood with her back to the market noise, the pen still between her fingers, not writing, only feeling the weight of the book, the simple fact of how many pages she had filled alone. He arranged a supply contact, she thought, more honest than her usual interior register, which startled her, for blue dye in the off-season through a man who officially no longer has standing on the commission routes. That is either incredibly stupid or incredibly careful. And I don't know which, and I don't know why I don't know which. She stopped the thought, wrote something, and looked at what she had written. It was Ossian Verath's name, with a small question mark she had not intended. Nuri's voice, last night. Some people make themselves small so no one has to look too hard and decide they're not worth the difficulty. She closed the ledger and walked back into the market at exactly the same pace. The question mark remained. By midday, at the foot of the eastern shelf, where the cliff met a narrow shingle beach, Jalle and Ossian crouched over a flat stone, with the map re-anchored against it. The sky was a hard, bright blue, the commission waystation a dark smudge on the distant eastern rise. They had been there an hour. The tide was coming in, and neither had mentioned it. "The secondary route cuts here," Ossian said, tracing a line above the paper without touching it. There was something young in his focus, a man in his element for the first time in years. "It adds 4 hours, but puts the waystation on your blind side. The catch is this canyon shelf. In spring melt, it will carry water, maybe a meter deep, maybe 2. No way to know until you're in it." "And if it runs deep?" Jalle asked, absorbing it, then pausing before the harder question. "Then you cross or you turn back," Ossian said, not performing the difficulty away. "There's no third option I can give you on paper." The tide licked the shingle 20 meters behind them, closer now. Jalle studied the map. "You've walked this route," he said, trying on words he did not usually use. "I surveyed it," Ossian answered. 7 years ago. Before." He did not finish, and Jalle did not ask him to. "We go in 6 days," Jalle said at last, the decision announced rather than made. "Before the melt peaks. We," Ossian repeated, and after a beat the warmth came whether he willed it or not. Jalle looked up. Ossian was not quite smiling. His face held the quality of a man who had just watched someone do the thing they swore they wouldn't. "Yes," Jalle said, aware of it, not retreating. The tide reached the flat stone then, cold water moving around the weights, not yet touching the paper. They both looked at the water. Neither moved, and for a moment the whole shore seemed to hold its breath. That evening, the wide common room of Nuri's house glowed under 2 paper lanterns and a banked hearth. Low tables, worn cushions, the warm anchor of grilled mackerel and pickled plum, miso and rice in clay bowls. The world outside was dark and starry and indifferent. Inside, the meal had done its slow medicine. Tomo had eaten 3 bowls, which was normal, and had been quieter than usual, which was not. Nuri refilled Sayira's tea without being asked, and Sayira wrapped both hands around the cup. The thing she did only when she had stopped performing, when she had slipped into simply being in a room with the people she loved.